Good afternoon and welcome to the Path to Excellence Principles of Judicial Administration and High Performance Courts. Before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to remind you to please fill out the evaluation forms. You could just leave them at the table or on your chairs and I'll pick them up after the class. Okay, I'd like to introduce the speakers now. Kevin Bowling, JDMSJA, is the trial court administrator and attorney referee for the 20th Judicial Circuit and Ottawa County Probate Courts in Ottawa County, Michigan. He is the current president of NACM and a fellow of the Institute for Court Management. His work in the judicial system spans 34 years with time spent as a court manager, an attorney, a judicial educator, and a court consultant, including service as a deputy chief of party for the Nigeria Justice Sector Assistant Project. Mr. Bowling also served in a variety of positions with the Michigan Supreme Court for 20 years, including state judicial educator and regional court administrator. Additional court experience includes internships with the Denver Juvenile Court and the North Dakota Supreme Court. Passionate about the courts and access to justice, Mr. Bowling is a member of the State Bar of Michigan, the Ottawa County Bar Association, the National Association of State Judicial Educators, and the American Society. He has served on the board of directors of the National Association of State Judicial Educators, the advisory board of the Leadership Institute in Judicial Education, University of Memphis, the Advisory Board, National Judicial College, Courage to Live Program, and the Technology Law Advisory Board, Institute for Continuing Legal Education. Cut yours down? Cut hers down. Okay. Janet G Cornell has been the court administrator of the Scottsdale City Court in Arizona since July 2002. She has over 30 years' experience in state and federal courts ranging across various areas, including probate, mental health, domestic relations, family court, regional court operations, court interpretation, and training. Ms. Cornell is a past president of NACM, the Arizona Limited Jurisdiction Court Administrators Association, and the Arizona Courts Association. Daniel Hall is a vice president of the National Center for State Courts, Court Consulting Services Division in Denver. There you go.
That's good. You can read about the rest of us, and the bios in the background. First, I wanted to thank you for coming and sharing this next hour and a half. We're very excited about what's been happening with the development of these two new products, the principles for judicial administration and the high performance court framework. They didn't come out of nowhere. They've been 30 years in the development, in the culmination, and I'll kind of show you that timeline in a minute. But before I start, I'd like to kind of give a context of where we're going, kind of posit three different scenarios and see if you identify with them. And keep these three scenarios in mind as we move through our presentations, because I think they'll give a little bit of a context for you as you hear Janet and Kevin make their remarks. Let me see if you identify with any of this. You've been working on a priority issue, case flow management, budget crisis, e-filing, whatever. And the presiding judge, chief justice, state court administrator comes in and says, all right, Craig, you're no longer on e-filing. I want you to go in and get on, automate our accounts payable, something like that. Or you've been working on case flow management, and they said, the budget crisis has come. I need you to get on problem-solving courts. Has that ever happened in your career where you've kind of gone 90 degrees? Raise your hand. And typically what happens, you move from project to project, and the other one kind of drops off the radar. Let me give you the second scenario. You've had court tools. You've collected a lot of data. You know, you've had meetings. You've got your staff in. You've got performance measures. And somebody in the crowd goes, now what do we do with it? You got the data. Now what do you do with it? How many of you have had that experience? Oh, good. You're not collecting data. Let me give you the third scenario, that you've been involved with an issue for a long time. Case flow management, problem-solving courts, new collection system. And the momentum just seems to stop. You know, you've been working at it a couple of years, the enthusiasm and the excitement just seems to fade away. And so I won't embarrass you don't have to raise your hand, but just think about the times that, you know, that has happened, because I know in my career, that's happened many times. You know, over 30 years, or about 25 years in the Colorado courts, 3 decades, I've been involved with 3 major runs of case flow management. And it's like you back up and you take a run, and you hit the wall, you work hard as heck, and all of a sudden, momentum's gone. You start, or the champion judge changes, the presiding judge changes. Oh, it's a new game. Hope you can hear. Okay, good. How about that? Look, can you turn up the mic a bit? I'll speak louder till he comes in. Can you raise your hand if my voice drops again? Could you turn up the mic a little bit? I'm sorry? It says. All right. How about that? How about that? Okay, is that better? No, okay, how about that? All right, here we go. You know, but in my career, you know, and that has happened. And so where we're going with this in the high-performance court framework is an attempt to give a focus that where you can keep all the balls juggling in the air and moving along at the same time. So all these projects, all this stuff that you've got going, how do you manage it and still keep it going? The second part is that you keep your eye, that the high-performance court keeps your eye on accomplishments rather than collecting data. It really moves to evidence-based management. And the third part of the high-performance court framework is keeping the momentum. How do you keep the momentum going? In the private sector, studies have shown that change efforts fail 70% of the time in the private sector. And there's 2 reasons they fail. The very major reason is that sense of enthusiasm or urgency. That sense of urgency, you know, isn't there or isn't shared by enough people in the organization to create a critical mass. The second major reason change efforts fail in the private sector is the message that doesn't get to mid-level management, or they don't buy into it. Those are the major parts. And so what the high-performance court tries to do is try to pull those things together. The other part that is happening, at least as I see it, and over the course of my career, is that over 30 years in this field, is that courts are getting larger, the business is getting more complex, we're getting more and more technologically proficient, and we're more and more managerially sophisticated. You know, we have courts that have, I think California's budget is over $1 billion. You have Phoenix or Maricopa Superior Court that has a budget of $300 million. These are major corporations that we are operating under. And beyond that, we have a situation where we are not isolated. More and more, we have to work with the justice community. The demand for information, integrated information across systems, development of problem-solving courts. You know, the independent of the way that we used to operate just is not the same. And so we have these 2 new tools that we're going to talk about. I'm going to give an introduction to the high-performance courts, and then Janet and Kevin are going to talk about, the high-performance courts frameworks from actually implementing it. I'm going to talk about the conceptual framework. But we are not strangers to this field, and if you look at that graph, that shows where we've come, the court community has come in terms of performance measures and actually performance management. That first mark there where the ABA standards were adopted in 1982 is when they were revised. They were really first adopted in 1976. And so you can trace that line and follow it through the development of the trial court performance standards, the court statistics standards, because as we collected more information, we noticed that nobody collects it the same, that we define things differently, and the need, if we're going to count things, at least to know what we're counting. You see the development of court culture kind of things, court tools, came in 2005 after we got some experience with the trial court performance standards with 68 measures. Some of us threw up our hands and said, give me 10, I can't do 68. All the way to the theoretical basis of the high performance courts started in 2010. And partly it came, if you look at the development, and you see, at least from my perspective, that you had the case flow management piece coming. And then as we started to be becoming more sophisticated in defining how we workload, how many people we need, judges, weighted caseload, it became another leg on that pillar. And then at the same time in the 90s, early 90s, there was an ever-increasing demand for accountability. And so you had those three big legs of the stool. And how are they connected? How do you connect those? And that's partly where the high-performance court came from. And all the products, all the solutions that we have in the court world, how do we connect them together to help us diagnose problems, find the solutions, and figure out if they work? In a nutshell, that's what the high-performance courts framework is. It's a diagnostic tool to help you solve problems. And finally, ending up here where we've just, in 2011, where we've just revised the time standards that hadn't been revised since 1982, the COSCA time standards. And as we get more and more, as the demand for accountability is ever greater, we have to have those benchmarks set. And so that revision of the time standards, I think, was a critical piece. What's not on that timeline, the next step, is maybe these the principles for judicial administration. And let me talk a little bit about those. Over the past 11 years that I've been in this job doing the consulting work, we probably do, 60, 80, 90 consulting projects a year. And so that's 900 or so over the course of the last 10 years. I think what we found that, what we've learned from that body of work is that, and particularly from the re-engineering projects that we've conducted over the past 3 or 4 years, is that you really need a set of principles to guide you as you're searching for these solutions. I mean, this isn't new to strategic planning. Strategic planning, you set out your mission statement and that, but this is really more of a set of operating principles. In 1972, the ABA adopted a set of principles for court administration, as they called them, but those were primary aspirational. What we are talking about here are operational principles that really serve as guidance, can give guidance to how. Because I'm going to give you some examples. Where these came from is, there was a convergence of a lot of work that was going on. We had, the governance principles that we've talked about here at this conference really began rising a number of years ago, and as Dan Becker and Chief Justice Durham developed those governance principles that some of you may have heard in that previous session started to come out, there was quite a demand for that, and there's a whole symposium, the national symposium that was held a year or so ago, was totally devoted to that. And in my business, again, of those projects, the 900 or so, 80% of them really involve major issues of governance and leadership that either interfere with successful accomplishment of projects or that need to change to be. So that governance and leadership piece is critical. And so we saw that piece moving from there. Meanwhile, there was the demand, the re-engineering work that we were doing, where we really went in and said, everything's on the table. We got to really think about how we're doing business. Well, when you throw all the stuff on the table, you got to have a lens to view it through, say what makes sense. And so in our re-engineering projects, we've always gone in and said, at the start, Supreme Court, Chief Judge, you said, what are the principles that you want to follow on this? So when all the stuff, the recommendations start coming in, how are you going to select? How are you going to choose which ones those are? So we had that set of principles coming in. And then we had the budget crisis hit. And the demand for stable and adequate funding. And the Bar Association called us about 2.5 years ago, the ABA, and said, we're here to help. And I used to lobby at the state level, and when the caller to Bar Association used to say, I'm here to help, I go, oh my God. But they have been terrific. But they started saying, we really want to help, and we think that course should have just their fair share of the funding. So there should be a formula in how much money states get from the general fund. I mean, on the surface, that sounds very good. But when you look at 16,000 courts in this country and see that everybody's different, no size fits all. I'm singing to the choir on this. I know you have elected judges, non-elected judges, centralized funding, hybrid funding, fees and fines. It's a very, very complicated system, where with those 16,000 courts handling 140 million cases with 33,000 judges and, hundreds of thousands of employees. It's really quite an octopus of an organization. And so rather than having a script, we countered saying, well, we should really develop some principles around funding that courts locally and state, whatever level, could use, both in managing their budgets better and in seeking stable and adequate funding. So that's kind of where these started from. And there's 25 principles, and they're divided into 3 areas. The first one is governance, which you've heard a lot about. Oh, and by the way, you have handouts. I think one of the handouts here is a very brief listing of all 25 principles. I'm not going to go through them all. I'm going to give you some examples. By the way, these are going, I've worked on this for 2.5 years. I've never taken so long to write a 25-page document. This horse has been kicked. It's been turned into a camel, and it's emerged as a racehorse. So, and we're taking it to the Conference of Chief Justices and the Conference of State Court Administrators next week at their meeting in St. Louis. And they'll, I'm hopeful, will adopt a resolution in support of these principles, and then we'll start moving them out into the court community at that point. But the governance principles, which you've heard about, really talk about what should, the governance and the leadership. What are the guidelines as addressing those? The decision-making and case administration, that's how we do our business. It's the principles around case flow management. It's commitment to accountability and transparency. It's those kind of things that govern the way we do business. The third set on the funding principles are divided into 2 sections. The first section has to do with how well we manage the budget. What are the principles that need to be in place to show how well we manage the budget? The second 5 principles under funding are principles that funders should consider when they fund the courts. And there's a logic to this, that, in order to compete in this game for scarce funding, and I was a lobbyist for 20-some years in Colorado. For us to compete with the big sharks in the water, we need to be able to demonstrate that we're good stewards. and that we do our work well, and we can are accountable for it and can show how well we're doing it. And that allows us then to secure more adequate funding. I think there's a lot, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Is that better? Oh, I've noticed with the grain of my hair, the aging of my 5 kids, the pain of 20 years of college tuition, my voice tends to drop. I don't know why. Maybe it's exhaustion. But thank you very much for pointing that out. So I want to give you a couple of examples within each of these categories. And as you can see there, the governance principles, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time about because there's been a lot of talk, but the principles that you see in this document are really aimed at courts. They're very court-specific. They have come out. We haven't invented them. They've really come out of the work Dan Becker and Chief Justice Durham has done and other work. So, they're talking about the first one, a commitment to transparency and accountability. But the trick, as you can see, is the second part, because all these principles kind of lay out there should be a commitment to transparency and accountability, but we try in these things to say, well, what's that mean? And then the second part, by the use of performance measures and evaluation at all levels of the organization. So that's what I mean about operational. I guess it'd be more aspirational if you just had judicial leaders should demonstrate a commitment to transparency and accountability. But I don't think that adds anything to the field. And I think the group of people thought, we've got to give guidance. So you see that second part. You see the next principle. Leaders should exercise management control over all resources, including staff funding that support judicial services within their jurisdiction. When you read those principles of the governance principles, a lot of people comment and say, wow, these are no-brainers. These are, there's really nothing new. How can you argue with applehood and mother pie? But it is amazing, though, how, and I think if any of you were at the sessions of yesterday with Dan Becker and people would talk about, I couldn't do this. I mean, there's a very simple principles, but the courts have really not gone a long way in terms of doing this. Now, these are not meant, all these principles are a template. They're not meant to be adopted by courts as whole cloth. You've got to look at them. Do they apply to you? Some of it you're not going to be able to do. It recommends a certain term for a presiding judge and how they're selected. Well, most of us don't have control of that, particularly in Massachusetts. But it tries to set the bar about how we measure what we're doing and the direction that we're going. Case administration, these are, again, how we do business. Unified forms, simplified procedures, making things less complex. Principle 12 is really a case management principle. The principle of proportionality in case flow management. So there's 8 principles in there that address those. And the reason there's 25, because I can only think in kind of numbers that we had 24. I said, we can't stay with 24. It's like when we were doing court tools, we had 9. I said, we can't do 9. There's got to do 10. So, there may be no rhyme or reason. There may be other principles, but these are the ones. So, in the funding principles, again, there's 2 parts. There's the first 5, 15 or to 20. That really talk about how we should manage our budgets. And the one you see here saying we have a responsibility to put budgets together that are business driven, that have business justifications, that are justified by rational workload models, and have performance measures to it. Now, the second 5, I'm going to give you 2 examples here. And these are the ones that set out what funders should consider when they fund. And you see here that same principle, that when a legislative analyst comes and talking to you, knocking at your door, and they should keep in mind that that they have a workload model that's rational, it's been objectively put forward, that justifies the staff. And it says, okay, we need to be funded at this level because it's professionally. On the other hand, it has that performance measures. Courts need to be funded at the level that they justify professionally and can perform at that certain level. So there's a quid pro quo to that, and you'll see that through the is a central part of the principle. The last principle I want to bring to your attention is the one around fees and fines. I think in the late 80s and the early 90s, the Conference of State Court Administrators came out with a policy paper saying that courts should not receive any money from fees and fines. Well, the water's far past the bridge on that, particularly in the economic crisis, we've seen fees and fines. In the last recession from 2001 to 2004, 65% of the states raised their fees and fines. The start of this recession, there was really a break. For the first 2 years, you didn't see very many states raising fees and fines. Boom, the floodgates opened. And now we see again maybe 30 states have raised fees and fines. And so you have, some states, California, Colorado, have a civil general jurisdiction filing fee of around $350. Then you have your answer fee. Then you've got your motion fee. You're at the point where you say, well, what about access? And so this principle gets at the fact that, recognizes the water's been under the bridge, but says a couple of things. One, that filing fees should never be the primary source of funding. 2, that they should be reasonable so that they do not limit access to the public. And those are the main things. I wanted to add a couple other things, like, when that all fees should go to the courts, not to the marriage licensing department or to some advocate group. But those are battles that are waged at the local level. So before I start into the high performance court framework, you probably wonder, well, how are these two connected? And it goes back to what I was saying in terms of there are some foundation pieces in here. There are these principles that need to be in place as we move towards this high-performance court framework. But it also, I think, serves a real, what I think is my putting on my old lobbyist hat, a real practical function in saying that we have done our business. We are doing our business efficiently, and now we need more funding. And I know that's hard, and Janet is going to address that in her example to a certain extent, because some of this stuff can be used in your battles for funding. And so that's kind of the connection between the two. There's the foundational pieces that you need as you move into the high-performance courts. Now, let me bring you back to the question, to those situations I posited before, not to go through them again. But just to kind of refresh those in your mind, that we want, I think, with the high-performance court framework, really wants to accomplish three things. One, provide a comprehensive management approach, which is a way for courts to manage their complex projects, and as I said before, that analogy, you're juggling the balls and moving forward. Help courts move from performance measurement to performance management, and really that whole concept of evidence-based management, rather than thinking, I intuitively know that this project is working, I can feel it, and I've talked to people. How do we demonstrate that, and how do you know that's working? And fundamentally, the last piece And I think this is the fundamental piece of the high-performance court framework. It provides a way to diagnose and solve problems. I mean, fundamentally, that's it. It has a name, but it is intended as a way to say, what is my problem? How do I diagnose that problem? What are the solutions that are available to solve that problem? Which ones do I apply, and how do I measure them to know that I've been successful? And that's it. That is all it is. And you look at your, that handout and conceptually, but put simply, it is a way to diagnose and solve problems. And on an ongoing basis, so that we don't lose that momentum, that it gives you a tool to move, as momentum's slipping. How do you keep that going? So I want to talk a little bit about the comprehensive management approach. As I mentioned before, courts are faced with, they're complex organizations. They address a large number of issues. And how do you keep that in perspective or manage it all? And the high-performance court framework offers 10 perspectives to work for to achieve excellence in each one. These are all listed in your handout. But I'd list them here. Effectiveness, how effective are we in handling our cases, procedural satisfaction, how well do we provide fair and accessible services to the public, productivity, are we making the best use of our staff and judges, human capital, do we have the HR system in place that really supports our organization? Court budgets are 85–90% people. They are our asset. Unless we manage our workforces to the best, we're not going to be a high-performing courts. Organizational capital. How are we organized properly? Is our culture in good shape? Are our interrelationships with other government agencies or nonprofits or whatever, are they in good shape? Technical capital. Do we have the technology in place to accomplish what we need? The last couple, and usually I like to say that this public trust and confidence really is a sum of the first 8. I mean, if we do our work properly, then public trust and confidence should result from that. However, there are things that are being done out there, outreach programs, civic programs, courts sitting in schools and hearing cases. There are those kind of things that just independently. The last part about supporting legitimizing authorities is the relationships with the other branches of government and how those things are working. And part of that could be the weighted caseload or a model that really is objective, that demonstrates what our staff needs are, that bridges those relationships. Performance measurement to performance management. Yes, when we came out with court tools in 2005, there was a few courts that jumped on. I would bet now most courts, I would hope most courts in this country use one or more of performance measures. How many of you have performance measures? Yeah. That's 50–60%. Raised their hand. There's probably some that didn't raise the hand, and I think that movement is not going away. I think what's the important message and the important concept of the high performance court measures are that they're linked to those key principles, those principles that we went through earlier. There's a link to those. So the performance measures and your performance measures, if you come up with other programs and other principles, your performance measures need to be linked to that. Key part is balanced. Too often, we just simply report filings and dispositions. But we're about the business of justice. And so measures around access and fairness are very important. They have to be measurable, sustainable, For me, the last one, which is the KISS principle, keeping it simple, keeping it practical, and keeping it few. And then this demonstrates in the high performance court framework has arrayed the performance measures, the performance measures of the court tools within these 4 of those 10 areas that I identified. And again, that goes to that balance. If you just simply have effectiveness, if you're just reporting on these kind of things, you can see that we're missing a good part. And that's not the message I think that we want to give to the public and to the legislature. We want to give the message not only are we efficient, but we're, that there's procedurally we are providing fair services to the public. And the final part is diagnosing and solving the problems. There's a schematic in your handout again on this that shows kind of a more detailed quality cycle, which is nothing new in management. I've kind of simplified it here because the other one doesn't show up well on the screen. But basically you're talking about assessing the problem, diagnosing it, coming up with a plan, what are the solutions that could be involved, implementing and evaluating, and doing it on a constant cycle and creating a culture around that constant cycle. So those, conceptually, that's it, what the high performance court framework is. Now, how do you get started? If you're at all interested, you want to dabble your toe in it and say, well, how do I get started? We've created a self-assessment instrument that creates 10 questions for each of those 10 areas of excellence, I'll call them, that are kind of like checklists. And our research division created these things and tested them and worked with courts, with Janet and Kevin. And they're meant to be kind of a checklist of what would be some best practices in each of these 10 areas. And so you can self-assess where you rank or how you rate with those. It's a quick and easy kind of thing. It starts to get you quickly into the assessment part without collecting a lot of data. It's not the end point. I mean, it is a perception. Wrong way. There's a screamer out there. And so, it's just a way to give to gain the perceptions of your folks, of yourself. And this is it's an online tool that you can put it up online, give it to your folks. We collate it. It doesn't cost you anything. If you want to do it, it doesn't cost you anything to do this kind of step as you go through. It's a diagnostic and it's an assessment instrument. But Kevin's going to talk more about the results that he had in his courts. But here's an example of what the questionnaire looks like. The questions are arrayed here, and it's a 5-point Likert scale. And you can choose you can choose how to slice and dice it by judge, by court staff, by administrator, by probation officer. However, and I think we've seen results that are very interesting. Managers may think that in the policy and administrative side, things are looking pretty good, and we've seen results that come out the other way. Well, that's not always seen by the other either judges or other court staff. Here are some quick examples of questions. I'm not going to read these. I'm going to throw them up. There's 10 of these kind of questions in each ones, and you can see they're more like checklists to kind of see, where the, to get a sense of where you think you stand in terms of each of those 10 items. I think these are on your slides, handouts too. And my point is, again, just, that these questions, by the way, we've also developed an international framework for court excellence. And there's a lot of similarities between the two. I've been involved with a consortium with the Singapore courts, the Australian courts, the European Union, and the Federal Judicial Center. And we've kind of did a international framework for court excellence. It only has 7 areas of excellence, and that fit more of a global model. But it also has an assessment questionnaire that's very similar to this. I think if there's 2 points I want to make. One, globally in courts, there's a growing interest in these quality systems. They call them quality systems. There's systems in the Rockcrack queue in Denmark. Finland has one. Singapore has one. There's more and more of these quality systems that try to do this ongoing improvement, address the ongoing improvement part. So as I finish, I just want to finish on little remarks about what's next. And as I said before, it is hard. This is a diagnostic problem-solving tool. And some of you may be familiar with online systems like MedMD, where you can go in and helps you say, well, I've got this pain. It helps you diagnose or semi-diagnose a problem, give you some release. And we started thinking about, well, what about in this, using the high-performance court framework, to make an online system, CourtMD, where anybody could get online, go through a decision tree to help diagnose a problem, get an array of solutions, and then apply those solutions that are able to apply those solutions and attach with that performance measures that might apply to that. And so we've been in discussions with BJA to start moving ahead on this. I don't know where it'll go, but again, pushing that diagnostic. With that, let me stop talking about the theoretical, and Janet and Kevin now will talk to you about how the rubber hits the road with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How are we doing out here? For those who might be asleep, wake up. For those who can't hear, please raise your hand and nudge us. For those who want a change of scenery, come on up here. I won't bite. Neither will Kevin. Oh, well, I better not speak for you. How many of you have heard of the court tools standards before you came in here today? Quite a few of you, but not all of you. How many of you have heard about the high performance courts framework before you came in here today? Again, quite a few of you. Good. My duty, my job is to take some of these conceptual items, some of this philosophical, great information that you've heard from Dan, and make it practical and share with you exactly how my court has used this. I work in a limited jurisdiction court, municipal court, City of Scottsdale, Arizona. We handle misdemeanors, traffic violations. We have a staff of 60 people. We have 6 judges. We are the 4th largest city court in Arizona by volume of filings. We get anywhere from 110 to 120,000 new filings every year. We're the 4th largest municipal court in Arizona by number of staff. We had started using some of the court tools measures, just individually, a number of years ago. We use court tools measure number, I believe it's number 9 on staff survey, the staff evaluation. We now have about 9 or 10 years of this trend data. We have also done court tools measure number 1 on customer access and fairness. We now have 2 years of that. We'll be doing a 3rd round of the survey this fall. So we had dabbled in some of these things. We have begun to collect increased numbers of statistics. We do annual statistics. We do monthly statistics, aggregate and in detail. We report them to the Arizona Supreme Court. We had done a fairly limited job of posting it for our own city leaders. In about, probably about two years ago, I happened to be at a National Center for State Courts meeting and hear of this concept of high-performance courts. About the same time, our court got in the crossroads of disagreement, dispute, criticism. And here's what was happening. I'm from the city of Scottsdale. When you think of Scottsdale, Arizona, what do you think of? Huh? Money. Yes. The city was chartered in 1951. The city is entering a fiscal crisis like it has never known in its life. It does not know how to deal with this. City council is divided bitterly. City manager, city council are divided bitterly. Lots of turnover of top leaders in the city. Fiscal crisis, top to bottom. Disagreement on leadership, top to bottom. The court was relatively obscure. As I mentioned, we had statistics, annual, monthly. We sent them to the Arizona Supreme Court, but we didn't do much of a job talking about who we were and what we do with the city, with the leaders, with the citizenry. So discord within the city, fiscal crisis. We also know that our caseload is only comprised of 37% of our cases come from the citizens, the residents of Scottsdale. So there's a significant group of users of our court that are not residents, not voters, not aligned to the values of the city. Our workload comes from seasonal, tourist, high-profile events, auto auctions, golf tournaments. Our court came under intense criticism verbally in city council meetings, blasting decisions of the judges, alleging that the court did not do its share of cutting the budget. At one point, the mayor and council who appoint our judges fired or released 2 of our judges within a span of 3 months. Within 3 months, we lost 40% of our judge power. Our court was at a crossroads. I had just come back, or about the same time, from this National Center meeting, hearing about high-performance courts. We started in on a process then of hooking our identity more to court tools, high-performance courts, self-assessment, use these measures, use this data. We had collected a variety of statistics, both from our case management system and other counting mechanisms. We were at the crossroads of needing to decide how we were going to do a better job talking about ourselves. So, again, a little bit about the background. There were some internal and external perception, misunderstanding, didn't know who we were, what we did, why having a court was important. In short, the political environment and the leadership challenges were significant. So, why did we get into this? We had the leadership desire to get started using these measures, to do more than just the small nature of publishing statistics. Local pressure, we had collected measures. We keep track of how many people come in the building, how many financial payments, how many contracts, how many documents are put on our electronic document system, how many phone calls, how many accesses by the web. We had gathered and continue to gather a variety of statistics about how we operate. We thought using this process would be one more way to expand, to shore up, and to talk about the business of the court, the importance of the court, and what we do. We're not the city water department. We're not the transportation department. We are a little different. Using these concepts has turned it around 360 degrees. Before we started this, we had rudimentary statistics. We had very limited, no overt sharing. We were sort of resting on our laurels, and the city leaders thought we were just humming along, doing almost bare minimum. We do have a case management system that's been helpful for us, and as I mentioned, we already and also had developed a lot of counting mechanisms. After the fact, we have published data. We have increased awareness of court measures of performance, things that mean something appropriate to a court. We can all think of what we do every day is very different than transactions with the city planning and zoning or other governmental entities. Would you agree? We're very different. We have some parallels. We were choosing to use court-based terminology, data, and to use it to inform our funding agency. Therefore, we increase the predictability of talking about who we are, our accountability, our transparency, making sure the other parts of our governmental operation understood our role. Here then is an example of our court tools document. It's not important that you read the fine print. What I want you to see is we have all 10 court tools measures at the top, a narrative explanation at the bottom. We added 2 more measures. Number 11, total cases per judicial officer, and number 12, total cases filed for the court. We have comparisons over the years. This is embedded in our court budget submission document. This is posted on the city's website. The citizens can see it. There is some risk in this. We have published cost per case. There is some risk. What if the caseload per judge goes down? We chose to accept this risk and this challenge. So this is an example of how we have inserted our court tools measures in the court budget. This has now come to be expected every year. I can't wait to see what your court tools measures are, the council may say. It has turned around the perception of our operation. Moving now to the high performance courts concept that Dan has shared. Our court collaborated with the National Center and in fact took this survey, 100 questions, grouped in these 10 areas. We even proofed the language of the questions in advance before the official survey was kicked off to make sure they made sense and they were clear. Remember, I'm in a limited jurisdiction court, and there were some questions that simply weren't pertinent to our level of court. We had the benefit of working with the National Center to proof this and suggest some enhancements, and to their credit, some modifications were made. We had a sampling of 30% of our court staff take this survey online, all of our judicial officers, all of our senior management team, and a sampling of our non-management personnel. 99.9% response rate is what we had. 100 questions is not a small amount. I was very wary of how the judges would react. We had all but one judge participate. It was great. So we have lived this survey. We have come out of it with data. The National Center compiled it, sent it to us. We had a chance to look at it. We then had a meeting with consultants from the National Center and talked about what we saw. The data was sliced and diced. We could compare by position of person answering, by question. We could compare management, non-management, judge, non-judge. Very, very interesting. I hope in the future that our entire court staff will take it, and that for those who took it last time versus now, we'll have some comparison. Here's another picture of what the survey actually looks like, and it's the forced choice questions. We went through 100 of these questions, and it worked out better than I thought it would. We had tried to jazz up our staff and our judges' interest in doing this. So we now have the results from these, and we can see alignments or differences in how we think we are working. We also looked at this diagram that's in the handout that you have, the quality cycle process, which is nothing other than problem resolution. Identify the problem, think about the options, test out the options, implement them, analyze, do it again. We took this and prepared a proposal on how to apply it to case flow management. So we have a draft of that document that we hope to dig out and work on some more using this methodology. We also took the high performance courts framework areas and our court tools measures and embedded them in our annual report. Again, we're trying to take the step to add credibility, dignity, accountability, understanding of what a court does. This is our annual report from fiscal year 10-11. It's not important that you see the fine print, but the concept, the light blue areas in the bottom quadrant are the 4 performance framework areas that the high performance courts concepts use. We embedded in here accomplishments from our court for this fiscal year operation. We used court tools data. We've got all 10 court tools in here. So we found a way to use that structure to put our accomplishments, and it's in our annual report. This is on our public website. This is sent to our elected officials. This is sent to all other executive leaders in the city of Scottsdale. So another example of how to take the concept and put it into practical use. So what's next for us? We are going to continue using these court tools in spite of some of the risk of calculating some of this. We're going to continue the use of the performance measures and the self-evaluation. We have applied for a grant from the State Justice Institute. I'm happy to say we have received a grant, 12-month technical assistance grant. We will use the consulting services of the National Center to take this and move it further across our court operation. We will use the results to inform our funding agency to talk about our court management, our court operation, perhaps push it out to our court users. Use it as the methodology for continued problem resolution. We intend to use this SJI grant to focus on criminal case flow management, because that is a very strong area where cases can get bogged down. Ultimately, we want to manage with data and we want to tell our story. We want to continue to tell the story of who we are and what we do. So, some ideas about integrating these concepts. We have talked about linking. We have a series of projects we undertake each year about better linking them with court tools measures and data, and better linking them with the high performance courts areas that you've heard Dan mention. We've talked about, and we hope with the assistance of the SJI grant, to further expand this to our judicial officers. They've been a bit at the periphery of this. We have some believers. We need to get them under the tent. We've talked about having educational sessions for our court staff, all staff, about these. In fact, when we were preparing our court tools, I gave a presentation to the Scottsdale Citizen Budget Commission about the court tools. They were impressed. It was court-based operation. It was not simple city customer interactions. We have really, really enhanced and amplified the city's perception of how we operate. Bottom line, we want to have and be a role model of how to do this. We want to feed and create good perceptions of our court operation, and ultimately have an opportunity created to advance and promote the role of the judicial branch in our city as a limited jurisdiction court. And so I look forward to having more information, perhaps at a future conference, to share with you about how this goes. I do encourage you to think about all of this, our entire section today. What would work for you? How could you start? My pitch is start somewhere. In the earlier session, someone asked about, does your case management system support doing this? Yes, we have a good case management system. Are your judges fully involved? We're going to get there. Right now, they're a bit at the periphery. My pitch to you is, you can do it. Start somewhere, start small, use some of the models you've heard us mention today, and maybe you can present at next year's panel talking about high-performance courts. So I thank you for your attention. I'm going to let Kevin now share some information about his court's experience with the high-performance courts framework. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. When I was asked to participate in this panel, my role, as it was described to me, was to provide some context with some other examples, a different kind of jurisdiction, a little different experience in how this high-performance court framework got put into place and how we're dealing with it right now. But to be able to do that effectively, I've got to give you a little bit of where I came from and how some of my biases have developed over the last 34 years working with courts. A big chunk of the time that I spent in courts was with the Michigan Supreme Court, working as a regional court administrator. Michigan has 83 counties. We have 243 trial courts in the state, and those trial courts for administrative purposes are divided into 4 different regions. I was responsible for one of those regions for a long time. So when we talk about herding cats in the judiciary, my judges or my cats I had 150, about 2,000 plus court employees, 60 different court locations, and I spent on average 3,000 miles a month clocking, moving from court to court to court. So I got to see a lot of different jurisdictions, a lot of different ways courts do business, and one size doesn't fit all. And that's always a concern that I have when I look at frameworks or I look at tools and I try to think to myself, are we trying to straitjacket a particular court? And part of what I'd like to do is reassure you that the high-performance court framework does not straitjacket a court. It's very flexible. You heard about the municipal court experience. In my county, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our experience with a circuit court, a district court, and a probate court. So we have a general jurisdiction court in our circuit operation and 2 limited jurisdiction courts with our district and our probate court. I think this framework would also work just fine in a federal court environment. So there's a lot of different applicability, but that just gives you an idea of part of where I'm coming from. When I talk about Ottawa County, Michigan, Janet talked a little bit about her situation in Scottsdale with lots of money and lots of interesting situations going on there. Ottawa County is a beautiful county. It's the 8th largest county in the state of Michigan. It's on the west coast of Michigan, right on Lake Michigan. I can walk out of court on a nice day like today and go sailing. It's a nice place to come. If you ever want to come and spend some of your tourism dollars, we'd love to have you there. So just come on over. When we looked at getting started, a little bit about the background in the county itself, what led us to the high-performance court framework, or at least the readiness or the openness to do this, is a strategic planning process. When I arrived at the courts where I am now about 10 years ago, nobody had ever thought about strategic planning before. It had never been done. Folks were working in silos. They were doing their own thing. There was no idea about a big picture of how courts ought to operate. So we started to invest time and energy into doing some comprehensive strategic planning. And if you want to look at some of that experience, just to put in a plug for our great NACM publications. Peter worked on, as one of our editors on some of these at times. The Court Manager, Volume 23, Issue 2, gives sort of a cookbook approach to the strategic planning process that we followed there. We also had a desire to incorporate performance measures in that strategic planning process and also our regular budget process in the county. Part of that was an internal motivation. Part of it was an external motivation because in Michigan, the courts are not unified. We don't get our funding from the state. We all have to fight, argue, lobby, cajole, arm twist at the local level to get our budgets for our courts. The only thing that's state funded really is the judges' salaries. So we had to drive that down, and in many counties in Michigan, maybe it's your experience in some of the places you're working now, we're getting more and more pressure from our funding units, not just to say how many things we're doing, number of cases or that type of thing, but what are the outcomes? How do we know you're doing a good job? If we're putting in county taxpayer dollars to operate the courts, how do we know it makes any sense or that you're making any progress? So what we had to do was look at ways to take these performance measures and build them into our court budgeting process and try to help the county better understand where we are going, what we're trying to accomplish. And the other thing, from sort of a protectionist view, again, I don't know if you've had the experience in your localities, but we've had some planners through our county come in and try to impose performance measures on the courts, performance measures that have nothing to do with court operations. I think Janet said something to the effect that they're not the water department or they're not the transportation department. And we had people coming in looking at court operations and saying, we think we know your operation better than you do. So we're going to tell you what you're going to track. We're going to tell you how you're going to perform. And the one that was really sort of the kicker for it, that got my judges on board, they're not around the periphery, they're on board with us. We had a county come in and say the first performance measure we're going to impose on the court is the number of times a judge gets appealed. Not whether they're affirmed or reversed, but if you get appealed, then that's going to be a measure of your performance, and it was a negative measure. And it just didn't make sense. So we had to look at ways where we could work with the funding unit to better understand what was going to be happening. In addition to that context, we had a situation where our state court administrative office, we have a new state court administrator, relatively new, within the last year, who came up with a new initiative and just sent out a memo to every court in the state and said, as of January of 2013, every trial court in this state will have a public dashboard posted with performance measures on some website. No indication about what those performance measures ought to be, no indication of what you're going to measure, how you're going to measure it, but there will be public data available on a public website in an effort to appear more transparent to the general public. So we had to stop and think about that and think about these outside constraints that are now being put on a trial court to try to come up with the best possible plan that we could come up with. And that drove us to look towards a systematic framework like this high-performance court framework. A couple of other things that had occurred in there, and it's been mentioned before, but we learned that there might be SJI grant dollars available. And we were successful in applying for a grant, getting a small technical assistance grant, and then we also learned that the National Center for State Courts had some consultants that were available to do some technical assistance work with us. So that meant either me as the court administrator or any of you as the court administrator don't have to worry necessarily about trying to figure this out from scratch and do it entirely on your own. There is help and assistance out there if you have an interest in doing this. So beforehand, before we looked at implementing this high-performance court framework, we had lots of statistics, but we didn't have a coherent kind of framework to have them all make sense in the context of how a trial court either does operate or ought to operate. So that was helpful. Again, don't know what all of your experiences are. When I hit the courts where I'm working currently, one of the things I found out very quickly is that everybody worked in silos. So we have our criminal division doing one thing over here. We've got our civil division doing something here. Our child support folks are doing their own thing. Our juvenile services group is doing something else. Our probate court, the case management systems are different. The information doesn't go back and forth smoothly. People weren't talking to each other. And within the court itself, we were competing with ourselves for scarce budget resources. It's a crazy way to do business. So again, going back to that strategic planning process, trying to tear down the silos and then use the high-performance court framework to look at how we can work more effectively and look at the big picture for the court operation. And I mentioned this, I got a couple of laughs earlier when we were talking about this, but it seemed like management by intuition. Everybody was working on their gut. Everybody that was an individual manager or administrator in different divisions had a gut reaction of how things were going. But if you asked them, you walk up and say, show me the data, sure, they had lots of data, but they had no idea what it meant or how it ought to apply. And certainly not from a big picture standpoint. So again, by going to a high-performance court framework, it actually gives you a framework where you can plug some of this information in. We began by trying to reach out to all of our judges. And we knew that in our court context, we weren't going to get very far down this road unless we clearly had judge support. And as I mentioned, that little excitement with the appeals being one of the performance measures for judges got their attention and kind of helped get them on board pretty quickly. But we also involved our management team, all of our administrators and mid-level managers, and some folks that were in key positions. And in our county, we have this little acronym that's called SPOT, and everybody understands what it is in our context, but it's our Strategic Planning Oversight Team. And that Strategic Planning Oversight Team includes judges, administrators, mid-level managers. It includes our union stewards. It includes some frontline staff people. So rather than being as aggressive as Janet was in Scottsdale, we limited that survey, that initial assessment, to see how we were going to go forward to our SPOT team. And that seemed to work pretty well for us in that case. We used that same self-assessment survey. In our experience, we also found that some of the questions didn't make sense in the context of our jurisdiction. So we worked with some of Dan's staff to make some minor adjustments, and then it worked just fine. And then after we did that, we went to a next step, and we actually conducted a workshop for all of these SPOT team members, the Strategic Planning Oversight Team. And one of the things we tried to do, because it was a new idea to bring into Michigan, I was also able to convince the state court administrator to come and sit in on this meeting, listen to what we were talking about, listen to how people felt about this new edict that had come down from the Capitol, saying you will develop these performance measures, you will put them online, you will be publicly accountable, and then figure out, how do we do that? What does that actually mean? How do you operationalize that kind of a mandate? So we worked through that, looking at all of our existing performance measures, and then looking at how we're going to develop that data for an online dashboard. Both Janet and Dan talked about the court tools. One caveat I'll throw in when we look at existing performance measures, in our experience, the court tools are very helpful. They're very effective, but they only go so far. And we had some disconnect with some of our staff, primarily in our juvenile services area, where they looked at the court tools and said, that's really not the language we use. We do different things when we're dealing with kids and families, and part of what we did was then to help deal with that issue, to develop what we call a community report card. And it's something that we've worked on with a few different jurisdictions, but it takes the concept of the court tools and the concept of performance measures and drills it down a little bit farther for juvenile applications, and then it made much more sense. And I think we're going to be able to do a better job communicating to the public how we're doing through that community report card. The one other area where we used something different is for those of you that are in the child support world and are dealing with the 4D agencies, or if you've got 4D operations in your court. We spun off of some of the federal performance measures that directly result in performance incentive money coming back to the court. We figured if the feds were going to check us out and decide whether we're going to get any incentive money in on these half a dozen or so performance measures, that needed to be part of our puzzle. So that was all included. Janet already touched on the survey results. You've got some examples from our experience in your material. It's a pretty straightforward survey on these 10 areas, procedural satisfaction, effectiveness, and others. we went through and, as I mentioned, included many of our staff from the district operation, the circuit, and the probate and family and juvenile areas. And what we liked about it is that it reinforced some of the things we knew about ourselves. In a lot of courts I've worked in over the years, we all know what we do well, and we like to focus on what we do well. So we know that people could find us. They had good access to the courts. We knew that we were successful in providing good support for people with limited English proficiency. We knew that because we had pushed it hard, that our employees were doing a good job treating court users with courtesy and respect. So there was a whole laundry list of positives that came out of doing the survey. But we also liked the fact that the National Center, in putting the survey together, didn't tell us we had weaknesses. They told us we had targets of opportunity. So it was a little different spin on the strengths and weaknesses, but it helped sell it. So we were able to look at ways by drilling down and dealing with this self-assessment survey to see, first of all, whether people within the court felt the same way, and where we needed to provide some additional work or additional focus. So where we're going from here, looking at the survey, and again, you've got all of that detail in your materials, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about our experience with it if you like, but we're going to continue using the court tools in the budget process and continue to try to help our funding unit better understand what a court is, what we do, what our basic mission is, and why it's appropriate for them to fund it at an adequate level. We'll continue to develop the performance measures that we think are needed over and above the court tools and put some of that information out on the website. In talking with some of Dan's staff, a revelation for many of my managers were that it's okay to have certain performance measures that are public performance measures and that ought to be out on the website and ought to be available for consumption and accountability and transparency purposes. But there might be other measures that the public don't care about, they don't need to know, but they're for internal management use. And this exercise helped us try to distinguish between those. So some of the benefits that we see in the high-performance court framework are this comprehensive management approach that's been talked about, that measurement to management issue. We feel that the importance of a balanced scorecard cannot be overstated. There has to be that sense that we're telling our story, we're telling it well, we're being accountable and transparent, and it gives us that good diagnosis and problem-solving problem. So that's a little bit about our limited experience. What we're finding is that as we do this in our state, in just one county, we've got other counties, other court administrators that are watching what we're doing. Many folks I hear don't mind being on the cutting edge, but they don't want to be on the bleeding edge. So we're trying to figure out how to balance that out. They're going to watch our experience and then perhaps join in the fun as we move forward. So with that, I think we're right on time. Dan might have some closing comments and then questions.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, now we have a few minutes. If you have any questions, anybody for any of us, are there any questions out there? I've got one. I think that as I've participated in your projects, I want to ask: have there been any unforeseen or unexpected consequences if you've moved forward with this? Either both.
Well, I'll start. Unexpected consequences. We didn't do a good enough job informing our full court staff about this, about our work, about our statistics, about high-performance concepts. We didn't do a good enough job. Another consequence, maybe not unanticipated, was the interesting, different self-evaluation scoring from the survey. The judges, for example, thought the court was making access to justice wonderfully accessible. The court management did not feel that way. There were some other questions, and you can slice and dice it, and that's kind of what Kevin was just talking about. Our upcoming anticipated challenge is when we've got these performance measures out there and something changes to make them go down or get worse. How are we going to talk about it?
I would echo those points that Janet just made. The one other thing I can think about our situation, in our county with 3 different levels of court, 3 different types of operations, we have different case management systems. And we found that to try to really drill down and look at performance measures, we had to figure out some way to take very old legacy systems and upgrade them and get to the point where we can really be able to share information in an intelligent, secure, professional manner. And we're still working on that. It's not fully accomplished yet. I think many of the performance measures we can capture data for, but as especially we look at some of the court tools and some of the formulas that are built into those court tools, being able to latch on to all of the correct data for all of the different court divisions and level of the court is going to be something we're going to have to work on a little bit harder.
Any questions out there? Yeah, Peter.
That's a great question. If you couldn't hear it, Peter was asking if going through this process required us to upgrade our ability to evaluate internally and make sure we had an understanding of what we were working with. This is a very unintended commercial for ICM. But over the last couple of years, one of the things that I have done is pushed myself and several of our key managers through the ICM Fellows Program, where they had to learn how to do research, they had to learn how to collect data, they had to learn how to write reports, and all of those kinds of things. That helped put us in great stead, because then as we had to go forward and do some of these things, I had people that understood what I was talking about when I said, here's what we have to do from an evaluation standpoint. So that was a great benefit. Otherwise, I think you're absolutely right. There is going to have to be work done to make sure you've got staff, key staff in the right position, right place, right time to collect and evaluate data and then make some sense out of it.
My response to that question would be yes, we had to upgrade, and we hope to use the SGI grant to further do that. Might not be through sending people to an ICM course, but enhancing staff's ability to look at data and enhancing our understanding of what it is we are pulling out of our case management system. Does that code mean what we thought it meant when we get this data aggregated?
Thanks. Any, okay, yes, over here.
How has this benefited our court's funding need and resources need? A practical example. Our example is the scrutiny, the criticism that was coming to our court, to our presiding judge, has stopped 100%. Now, we haven't gotten new funding, but we have laid in place the credibility and the transparency of how we operate that we think will help us in the future.
I would have to say the same thing. An interesting point is that on Thursday for this conference, we're going to focus very clearly on Stephen Covey's work dealing with the speed of trust. That really is the best way to describe the benefit that I've seen with our funding unit coming out of this kind of exercise. It has improved the trust levels between funders for the courts, those that are interested in analyzing court operations, and now when we go and we can provide clear-cut data that's understandable, they're much more willing and helpful to provide an adequate level of funding.
Let me close with a follow-up on that, because many of you may have heard me talk about the budget crisis in the courts over the years. I've tracked, for the past 5 years, the ebb and flow of the budgets, mostly the decline. If you look in the future, things aren't going to get better in the near future. And the challenge to us is, how do we provide not just adequate judicial services, how do we continue to provide good judicial services to the public? And it's got to be a new way of doing business. This, I think, offers a tool to do that in terms of constant improvement. There's one ways we've worked with courts to dramatically re-engineer their services. There's this other way where you improve. You just have this constant improve. In the private sector, they're often stated, unless you improve productivity 10% a year, you're not going to stay competitive. We have to have a way in which we incrementally and on an ongoing basis improve what we do to the public. So if you change this view with the high performance courts, not what it does for us, to that view from outside, what does it do for the people that we serve? I'm hopeful that it'll give us a tool, another in the arsenal, to deal with this economic crisis. So anyway, on behalf, I want to thank Kevin and Janet, and I want to thank you all very much. And so have a good rest of the conference. Thank you very much.